This is your Chargers linebacker, Daiyan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. This is your first time tuning into the show. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, let's see if we remember how to do this because it's been a minute since you and I have gotten a chance to do a show. As I mentioned last night, if anybody has listened to the Locked On Chargers podcast, I said something. Actually, you probably won't see this because it's split up into two parts, but I did mention something about, lightning doesn't strike twice, but it does strike in two separate places. And Dan and I, over the last 2 weeks, have essentially traded hell weeks for each other for one reason or another in our own personal lives that has kept us from doing shows. And to everybody who are our listeners, number one, thank you for your patience and apologies on our end for not being able to come out with anything sooner, but we are back. We know what time of the year it is. It is draft season. We are only 1 week away from the NFL Combine, and we still have a lot of work to do, Dan, because today, let's dive into the trenches. Roster construction episodes continue, this time focusing on the interior of the defensive line. And we have a lot to talk about, whether it stands with the current Chargers status of their interior defensive line, looking at possible free agent options for that role, that position as well. And of course, let's dive deep into the draft class that is relating to the interior defensive line. Dan Wolkenstein, before we kick it off, phlegm and all, how are you feeling, sir?
Oh, I'm feeling great. I'm feeling wonderful. I feel like a frog still. Yeah. Apologies in advance, folks. We have been going through it, Jake, like you mentioned. It's been a doozy. Everything is fine. We're good. It's just been a couple weeks. And the latest is I am insanely sick. So pray for me. I have to get through this episode. We'll see if I can get through without getting phlegm all over this freaking microphone. But until then, this is gonna be a fun one. I'm excited. We're going thick with 2 C's, Jake. Interior defensive line. And it's something that we saw kind of resurge with this Chargers team last year. Poona Ford, Tyler Tart, Morgan Fox, Tito, Scott Matlock, the whole nine. This defensive line kind of transformed before our eyes. But got to be careful because a lot of them are on the roster right now. So there's a big hole in the interior defensive line that we're going to have to talk about and what this Chargers team can possibly do. But Jake, before we get to that, I do care. If there's one thing I do remember, it's that I care. I care about my co-host.
I'm glad you remember this.
How are you?
Now that everybody knows that Dan gives a shit, I'm doing just fine. Thank you very much. Like I said, my hell week was 2 weeks ago. Now it's Dan's turn. So I'm doing fine. I'm better. I've gotten through my wave of crap that I had to get through. So hopefully there's not going to be another wave for a while because I really can't stand it and I'm bracing for it.
Yeah, I don't want to surf anymore.
Stay away.
But I'm swimming to shore. I don't want to paddle anymore. Just
the tides were too strong. Get me out of the water.
Yeah, I feel that. But hey, at least the Chargers, they didn't win a Super Bowl. The Chiefs, they didn't win a Super Bowl. All is back.
Thanks for the reminder.
Everything is good. All is even.
Everything's set to zero.
Everything is set back to zero. And the Chargers 2025 season can now start without having to worry about the defending Super Bowl champions being in their own division. That feels good. I'm going to take that. But Jake, before we do all of this, should we pay the bills? At least should we start to pay the bills?
Let's get them out of the way. So, want to remind everybody that BetOnline is your most trusted betting platform, your number one source for everything football. BetOnline is every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. You think you know your stuff? Get in our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every single week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of up to $200,000. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today to get on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here.
So this defense, luckily, Jesse Minter, safe, at least for another year, at the helm. Defensive line is important. And we saw how effective it can be with resurging years from Puna Ford, Tyre Tart. But they're now free agents, as is Morgan Fox. And so there's a lot of variables and a lot of things up in the air for this Chargers team, both in who they should bring back and who they want to bring back, as well as free agent pool and the draft. There's so many different positions they could do. Good news, though. Spoiler alert. If you're looking for an NFL draft prospect that's thick in the interior off defensive line, you can find 1 or 2 or 30 of them in this upcoming NFL draft. This is a deep, deep class for the big uglies. Jake, I want to ask you, how much should the Chargers be tapping into that versus how much should they almost kind of try to run it back?
I think you do a little bit of both, and I think you got a great chance at doing both. And the biggest reason probably that I say that is because of the man at the helm in Joe Ortiz. We talked about this a little bit last year when we were getting closer to the draft in terms of what the priorities were going to be for the Chargers heading into that draft. And I had mentioned, as it related specifically to the defensive line, you go back and you look at the consecutive years that Joe Ortiz and that front office and the Ravens prioritized the interior of the defensive line, whether it was rounds 1 through 4, didn't matter. It didn't necessarily have to be a high pick, but literally I think it was continuing this past year with Justin Abobi. It's been 11 straight years since Joe Ortiz has been part of an organization that prioritizes interior defensive linemen in the first 4 rounds. I think you're going to do it again this year. And what better way to do it, especially with a class that's this deep and has this much talent? You can find one, and I'm talking a good one, in rounds 1, 2, 3, or 4, whatever it is that you're looking for. If you're looking for more of a pass rush in your interior defensive lineman, this draft has it. If you're looking for more of your traditional, run blocking anchor that you need from an interior defensive lineman to clog up holes, this draft has it. So it's insanely deep. It's insanely talented. And as it relates to the free agency side, Dan, some of the names that we're going to talk about here, I think you've got a great shot at bringing them back. Much of the reason that there has been a lot of, I guess if we isolated it in the Brandon Staley era, I don't think there was enough priority put on the interior defensive line through his stage, even through free agency that just didn't end up hitting it during that period of time. But even when you look past that, whether it was Anthony Lynn's era or eras before that, there just was not the right priority pressed on that. It was more free agent heavy on the interior defensive line. And outside of Jerry Tillery, you need to start building long-term, and you need to start finding talent that's going to be able to contribute to you for a long period of time. Look at what Howie Roseman has done over the past few seasons alone. And yes, the Eagles operate with a BPA mentality, but I mean, their roster is just so stacked so that it affords them that opportunity to do so. But at the same time, they just don't care how many defensive linemen and big name bodies that they're going to put on that line, because one way or another, they're going to find a way to make it work, and they're going to get these guys playing time. And the result brought them a Super Bowl. So maybe you rip a page out of that moving forward over the next few years to say, hey, this is where we need to really build something up in the interior of the defensive line. You have to believe that something like that is going to be a focal point for Jesse Minter's defense for him to build that moving forward as well.
And see, the Chargers, unfortunately, they don't have the luxury of just focusing on one side.
They do not.
Whereas, we can say, oh, the Chargers need to prioritize their defensive line. But then we could talk about that. As soon as you start doing that, you could go 2, 3, 4 positions just with defensive line.
Yes, you could.
But then, oh, wait, they also have a secondary. And, oh, wait, they also have the receiving core and running backs and offensive line. Like, there's holes to fill. Not all of them can be filled in 1 year.
Yep.
So that's why this Chargers team, lots of money in the pocket. They got almost $70 million plus, depending on what they do with Joey Bosa and company. There's a lot of ways to kind of skin this. Jake, got a voicemail. To kick this thing off. Again, we're talking defensive line here. Our friend from Boston.
Yes.
Folks, let's get excited. Our friend from Boston called in. Getting called to the hotline anytime. 323-902-7586. Leave a voicemail. Be part of the show. Let's hear what Bob from Boston has to say about the defensive line this year.
Boys, Bob from Boston checking in. I am so happy that you boys taken off the diapers, cleaned up your bummies, and cheered up.
We're off to a great start.
Welcome back, Bob from Boston, and welcome back to Chargers Unleashed. Woo!
Chargers Nation, come on. Here are my thoughts on the defensive line. I would like to see us add someone, and the first and best move is to trade again, lease the Patriots on their high second-round pick. Do another pick swap with them. And maybe you get high enough to take Tyler Williams from Ohio State or that mountain man Derek Harmon from Oregon. Third guy, Michael Williams from Georgia. Bulk it up. But even more important.
Real quick, he's doing his homework.
He knows what he's talking about.
He wants to see us fleece the Patriots again. Circa Lad McConkey. Okay.
May not have the, quite the opportunity because there's a much bigger gap between the Chargers and the Patriots this year than there was opposed to last year. If you could fleece him again with another pick swap that looks similar to last year, hey, that'd be great. But unfortunately, there's a little bit more space between the Patriots and the Chargers this year.
Toughen up and install some discipline. We lost the playoff game because we lost our composure. Now, when I was in the fourth grade, my teacher was Sister DePazzi. Think about a tough old dame in a penguin costume, okay? She was all disciplined, man. She walked around the classroom with a ruler in her hand. Caught you chewing gum? Whack. Caught you talking? Whack. Bad penmanship? Whack. Offsides, lining up in the neutral zone? Whack, whack. Now, Jim Harbaugh is one tough nun in a penguin costume, all right?
Oh, my God.
He's going to walk around with the ruler, baby, and teach these guys that they can be tough. The Chiefs, after that disaster, they're going to be like the basketball player who caught a ball down low and spent the rest of the game on their hands and knees looking around for their cojones, all right? Who else is going to challenge us in the West? No one. Give me a Williams or a Harmon, top of the second round for the DL, toughen up the team, and off we go. All right? Love you, San Diego.
I got nothing, honestly. Bob from Boston is welcome to call to the show any time that he pleases, because there's always just a new visual anecdote that he puts into your mind. Now I have to picture Jim Harbaugh in a penguin nun outfit walking around a classroom with one of those yardsticks because of Bob from Boston.
Because of bad penmanship.
Whack.
Caught you chewing gum.
Whack.
Wow.
Not only did we get some great draft insight for what Bob from Boston wants, but now we got his fourth grade teacher going all the way back to elementary school. And somehow or another, it makes a great take for football, doesn't it?
Oh, we are so back. We are so back.
So awesome.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Jake, this Chargers defensive line needs to be more disciplined, needs to beef it up, needs to get a little thicker, says Bob from Boston. I mean, I don't know how you could argue it. And this, again, to the Chargers defense's credit, they did all they could in that playoff game, and they held on as long as they could. But you know that this Chargers team wants to kind of bring it up a notch. And Mike Elston and company, like, this defensive line is going to go to work. And so you kind of look at, like, the type, right? Do they like to get a Mason Graham? Sure. Like,
God, who wouldn't?
But let's be realistic here. So I guess maybe let's start off with what the Chargers currently have on their roster at defensive line, because I think it's easy to kind of go through all of the pipe dreams of what Chargers could get and what we'd like to have. But, like, let's not forget, it's kind of slim pickings right now with this Chargers team. We talked about it with the cornerback room a bit ago. The current roster for the Chargers interior defensive line: Jake, fans, listeners, Scott Matlock, Christopher Hinton, Justin Aboigbe, and Tito Abonya. End scene. That's it. Poona Ford, Tyre Tart, Morgan Fox, not on this roster currently. You got to actually go sign them. And there's a little typo here with Tyre Tart, but that's all right.
Yes. So I was just noticing that myself. So everybody who's going to say that is like, yes, we acknowledge faux pas. Welcome back, Chargers Unleashed. So sorry.
All good. I mean, you can't really be that excited about the current roster, but you wonder how much those free agents on the right would cost to bring back. And I mean, if you told me the Chargers brought back all three, sign me up. I'm fine with it. What do you see them doing?
I think you bring back Poona Ford, I think, should definitely be a priority to bring back. And I think that the Chargers realize that as well. For one of the, along with Tyre Tart, one of the signings that you brought forth, Poona Ford was tremendous for your interior defensive line. And with Bob from Boston talking about getting thicker, it's hard to find many that are thicker than Poona Ford out there as a defensive lineman. But honestly, I would not be opposed to, I think realistically, if you were to say it, is it realistic that all three, Tyre Tart, Poona Ford, and Morgan Fox, could find their way back to this roster? Yes. In doing so, would that probably drop the priority that you're going to invest in an interior defensive lineman for the draft and wait on it a little bit longer? Also, yes. But I think for sure you bring Poona Ford back. At the same time, Dan, what does the contract look like? Maybe it's a 2-year deal. I don't know if it stretches to 3, to be honest. But what you need to do as it relates to when you start looking at this roster, Morgan Fox is coming off of his extension that he had previously signed with the Chargers. And when you look at the rest of what is currently on the roster, Tito, Aboigbe, Christopher Hinton, Scott Matlock, who plays both ways, you need to start investing a little bit higher. Tito being a former 5th-round pick, Aboigbe being a 4th-round pick, Scott Matlock being a 6th-round pick. You need to start investing just a little bit higher. And again, thankfully for the Chargers, this is the draft that you can find some great interior talent in those first 4 rounds.
Now, I think this is an important part too, is discussing it from like a roster construction strategy perspective, because I think the Chargers are fortunate in that this defensive line class is so big and deep that the market for these free agents might not be what you thought they would be in years past, because there are so many options that teams could go into the draft. Like, I'm not going to spend 15, 20 million. I'll just go get somebody in the draft. There's 30 of them. So in other years, what Tyre Tart and Poona Ford did this past year might have garnered 10, 15, 20 million. I don't think that's the case this year. And so I think you'll be able to get some of these guys. I think you can probably get both of them. If I had to guess, I think you can probably get both under 10. Is that fair to them? I don't know, but I think you could do it. I think that's what this draft class is going to do, including some of the free agents that are coming in. But the important part here is this Chargers team has money to spend. And how do you spend that money? Do you spend it on premium positions at top dollar? Do you spend it on non-premium positions, top dollar? Do you spend it on premium and non-premium positions, but not top dollar? Like, where do you want this to be fleshed out? Do you want your roster to be super top heavy?
Yeah,
like it's been in years past. Do you want to have a bunch of depth like it was last year? We haven't even talked about defensive end yet right now with Joey Bosa, who might be getting cut. But you have options. And so I guess the question for you, Jake, is like, how would you like to see that? Do you want to see them go out and go crazy for the Eagles defensive tackle? Like, do you want big money spent here? Or is this like find the value picks and then draft your successors?
Traditionally, under a different regime, you may have gotten a different answer out of me. But we have to acknowledge again, remember when you look at the last time that the Chargers had this amount of money and who they brought in for free agents?
Don't remind me.
And virtually 95% of those free agents that brought in did not return value for you.
They, in fact, literally went the opposite.
Yes. And then you look at this year with the number of one-year prove-it deals that Joe Ortiz was able to bring in on guys that were considered injured that nobody wanted to touch, or guys who could be reclamation projects. Again, the Titans that basically just the Chargers just took all of the Titans players that they didn't want. Elijah Molden just signed a 3-year deal yesterday. Well deserved for him. Is Tyler Tart next? Who knows? So as far as the free agent class goes, I mean, having Milton Williams on this team would be phenomenal. But much like I had mentioned, the bidding war that you could get in with the Trey Smiths of the world, you're going to find a bidding war for Milton Williams services. So if it's me, I'm actually kind of leaning towards bring back your own. And I say that for a couple different reasons. One, because of the interior defensive line class that you have, you're going to be able to find someone in terms of whether it's rotational, starter, pass rushing defensive lineman, or run stuffing defensive lineman. You're going to be able to find somebody to build out that position for you. I also believe that Justin Ebogbe, who we did not get a chance to see much of last year, I think that there is a plan for him and his snaps to increase and have a bigger role along this interior defensive line. Much has been the case for the previous players that Joe Ortiz had drafted in Baltimore, and whether those guys were impact players day one or guys that in terms of rotation, again, we're talking specifically about the interior defensive line, whether those guys were more of a rotation that eventually ended up building into a role, there was a plan for them. And it's funny because we don't say many sentences like that as it relates to the Chargers. We're not used to it. That's something new for us to say with this new regime between Harbaugh and Ortiz. So what I'm leaning to is it, and this is me putting more of what I think that they'll do. I think that they're going to stay in-house as it relates to getting their free agents for this position under contract, and then invest in the future for what you have in this interior defensive line class.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is the way they want to spend their big money. But I could be wrong. But I mean, there's some dudes that they want to. You talk to Milton Williams. You know, there's Levi Onwuzurike. I forget his name. I forget how to pronounce his last name. Onwuzurike. Is that how you pronounce it? Am I saying that right? Whoever it is on the lines. There's BJ Hill, there's Jerron Reed, we talked about DJ Jones on previous episode, but we also got Tyler Tart, Puna Ford on our team. Those are probably the low end of the free agents in terms of value that you can get. So low dollar, high value that I think the Chargers could probably do. And you don't necessarily have a problem with that. Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, in my opinion. And so if you can bring them back, if the folks want to come back, get the band back together, sure. And then lean into the draft, because the draft has a ton of dudes. And that's got every expert talking draft excited, because you haven't seen this many defensive tackles with this much promise that I can remember, period, in a single year. So, I mean, I kind of agree with you. I think I'm taking value. If you can, bring back your guys. Maybe go out and find a couple of veterans that you can get for cheaper. But yeah, this isn't the position that I'm looking to break the bank for.
Yeah, I'd agree. Got to invest in more than just the 2024 season for this. And this arguably is one of the best interior defensive line classes that we have ever seen. The Chargers need to strike with this year, without a doubt.
Well, strike away, Jake. We said it's deep. There's a bunch of dudes. But before we get to these, let's strike a quick conversation about our other friends.
Yes, our other friends over at Underdog Fantasy offers the most unique approach to fantasy sports. With its simple pick'em style format, you can select players you believe will outperform expectations without the complexities of traditional DFS. The user-friendly interface and growing community make it easy and fun to play. Choose from a wide range of sports contests based on projections. You can select either higher or lower on individual player stats for your chance to win. So head on over to Underdog Fantasy today and use the promo code LAFB to let them know that Chargers Unleashed sent you. Underdog Fantasy, get in the game and win prizes today.
Jake, I know you've been gushing. You've been excited to talk about this group for a long, long time.
Talk about it.
So without further ado, Jake, let's ring the bell.
I seriously just need to make that my alarm clock chime. I need to hear it every day until the draft. Anyways, talking about the interior of this defensive line class as it relates to the NFL draft. Yes, Mason Graham is not pictured here yet for obvious reasons. Come on, guys, let's be realistic. We know where Mason Graham is going, and it's way before the Chargers are going to pick. So realistic options that could possibly be there at 22, whether we're talking trade up, staying at 22, or in the later rounds, there's more to choose from than what is just pictured for those of you watching on YouTube. But Kenneth Grant, Dan, is the first one that we need to talk about. He ended up on Bruce Feldman's freak list a year ago. I am super stoked to see what he is going to do at the combine this year. When Jim Harbaugh was still in Michigan, he gushed over Kenneth Grant. And there has been some mock drafts that have put Kenneth Grant at 22 with the Chargers. It makes sense for a variety of different reasons, for Jim Harbaugh to go back and get one of his Michigan guys, for Jesse Minter to install one of his defensive guys in this particular draft class. Kenneth Grant gives you a little bit of best of both worlds as it relates to both pass rush and run stuffing ability. So
he's like 6'4", 340. This dude's huge.
It's interesting when I started like putting this picture together, and maybe it's just if you're looking at this, Kenneth Grant is a wide dude.
He literally fills up the screen.
And then Walter Nolan, who's right next to him, is just a much more, slimmer as it relates to Kenneth Grant, but still at a good size as it relates to the position, but a much more athletic type of interior defensive lineman that can attack quarterbacks. But it's just not fair when you look at this picture. It's like, what the hell happened? Kenneth Grant is trying to eat the rest of these guys here. Moving on to Walter Nolan, Dan. The more I have watched of Walter Nolan, it seems like it's been the consensus that he has been moving up the draft boards as well. He's one of the top defensive tackles just in this class in terms of getting after the quarterback. Now, he possesses that size, speed attributes that normally are just not found among guys that measure 6'3" and 305. And against Georgia, go back to that game. He got the better of Jared Wilson on a number of different occasions. But he has just shown that consistency to explode off the snap. He's got that lateral quick around offensive linemen. He's another one that I'm looking forward to watching at the NFL Combine. And if he's there at 22, it looks like everybody's ranking Walter Nolan as IDL 2 behind Mason Graham, and then Kenneth Grant as number 3. That's what I've seen lately. It did not start off that way a month ago. Things have drastically changed, and it's going to change again once we get past the NFL Combine. And then Bob from Boston, one of his favorites, Derek Harmon. I might be higher than most on Derek Harmon.
Harmon.
I know when it gets past the top 3, I know everybody has their differing opinions on how they rank the top guys in this class, but Derek Harmon for me is easily IDL 4. Easily. And much in the same type of mold that Walter Nolan is, gives you a little bit of that best of both worlds in terms of an athletic profile, a guy who can get after the quarterback, good against the run. And then Dan, TJ Sanders, who was up there right next to him from South Carolina. So explosive disruptor is TJ Sanders. And we could go on and on and on about this, but I'm not going to fall into a full-blown monologue. So I'll shut up for a minute while Dan has an option to respond.
No, but I think the question is, and maybe this is for you and for folks listening, like, what's your appetite for interior defensive line at 22?
That's really kind of the big question as it relates to this class, but it's a great question to have. What's your flavor? What are you looking for?
No, but
what are your priorities?
But I think the bigger picture is, Are you okay if they go into your defensive line in round 1?
Yes. If Kenneth Grant is there on the board at 22, yes. If Walter Nolan was there at 22, I would say yes.
But if you were to stack rank, let's say those guys are there, but then Loveland's there. Let's say those guys are there and the running back's there.
Yeah.
Let's say receivers there.
Loveland or a certain running back obviously would take precedence over these defensive linemen. And again, this is talking about the depth of this class. I said it on Locked On. This class is Ed Harris in the abyss type deep. I mean,
but like
stacked.
So I think what I'm getting at is if this class is so deep, right? Especially defensive line, other positions of need, right? I think corner, wide receiver, running back, edge, guard, like other positions that they might need to fill that aren't as deep. Would it be better off to wait and use your premium selection on a premium position that might be not as deep?
I mean, you'd again have to fast forward to April 24th and tell me who's already off the board, Dan.
Sure.
So if both tight ends are off the board, if that certain running back over there at Boise State is off the board, I've actually, especially after seeing DJ's mock draft and watching a lot of Omarion Hampton, I mean, I would love to see Omarion Hampton on this team at 22. Not so sure.
Like Will Johnson.
Again,
if Will Johnson slips.
He won't, but that would be another one that I would say yes, because you have so much of the Michigan intangibles that it would just make sense for the Chargers. And God knows whatever ends up happening with free agency with Christian Fulton, with Asante Samuel Jr., corner may become a bigger, higher priority. And Joe Ortiz has always said you can never have enough corners.
So like defensive line, you have pretty high.
Yes.
Okay.
I expect them to attack that position by the end of day 2. You should see
at the
latest. So rounds 1, 2, or 3, the Chargers should be drafting an interior defensive lineman.
Okay. Who's your guy? Not. I'm just saying Kenneth Grant, Mason Grant. Like, who's the one that you're like, oh, all things being considered, doesn't have to be the best one, but who's your favorite?
The one who's, outside of those 4 that we were just talking about, if I was going down the list, I really like Aeneas Peebles. Strong against the run, quick, agile, can move past offensive linemen to get to the quarterback. Alfred Collins has looked really impressive in what I have seen from him on tape. And now again, here you go with picking your flavor. A guy like Jordan Phillips out of Maryland, who's not going to fill up the stat sheet. 6'3", 320, damn. He is just a powerhouse with crazy strength. Again, you go and you look at the stats, and if you're looking for pressures and sacks and all that, it's virtually non-existent for him. But he is so damn strong. He is so well-tuned against the run. And he finally started getting a little bit of juice during Senior Bowl week in terms of their practices. It's what do the Chargers want to prioritize? You go even further down from that, Dan. Whew. I've liked some of the tape that I've seen from Riley Mills.
We'll get to the discussions of these.
Yes, by the time that we get to this, and everything is going to change as it relates to following the NFL Combine. But this is just another example of how ridiculously deep this defensive line class is. CJ West, it would be tremendous on this defensive line. I would love to see CJ West on this defensive line. It'd be great. But we're going to get into all of that. It's nuts how many guys in terms of what it is that you're looking for that you can find.
Well, the good news is this Chargers team, we will see them make tons of moves with this position because they have no other choice. Their current roster with this group is very bleak. And so whether it is Poona Ford, Tyre Tart, Morgan Foxes of the world, bringing them back, whether it is they go out in free agency and go dip in the free agency pool at the high end or the low end and or the draft, something has to be done, and multiple things. I wouldn't be surprised if all three boxes are checked. Draft, free agent, re-sign. All three. Lots to be decided, but that's what happens when you got a thin room, but a lot of money to play with. Jake, we went through the interior defenders for the defensive line. Anything else before we jump on out of here?
I will say this. The NFL Combine kicks off next Thursday. Make sure that you watch the defensive linemen when they go out for on-field drills, because the amount of guys out of this class that ended up on Bruce Feldman's freak list, just to give you a little taste of what their athletic ability is going to be. I am super stoked to watch this group go in Indy next week and see them run on the field. Can't wait.
Let's go. Jake, it's been good. We finally made it. We're back. We didn't stumble too much out of the gates.
No, we knocked the rust off a little bit.
Just a little bit. This was fun. Jake, anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
Let's go.
Okay. For Jake, I'm Dan. Chargers Unleashed. We'll talk to you next time.